Hey everyone, and welcome right back to The Explainer. Today, we have a genuinely fascinating journey ahead of us. We are going to impartially unpack a pretty provocative and deeply philosophical text written by an author named Xuefeng. Now, this document dives headfirst into some massive concepts. We're talking utopian society, the fundamental nature of human beings, and a really sweeping critique of our global political philosophies. Whether you're a total political theory nerd or just someone curious about alternative ways to structure society, this is going to be a super eye-opening exploration into one very specific, highly detailed worldview. We're strictly looking at what the source material presents here, breaking down its boldest claims and some of its most striking metaphors. So let's just get right into it.
So the text we're digging into today kicks things off by anchoring itself to a really direct, profound question. Who has suffered the most in human history? It's a great hook, right? It immediately grabs your attention. The author draws on their own personal experiences living all across Asia, Africa, North America, and Oceania, and claims to have witnessed this universal truth. Basically, no matter where you go on the globe, there's one specific group of people that always bears the absolute brunt of life's hardships. And Xuefeng's entire ideology is built around proposing a radical, ground-up solution to relieve the suffering of this specific group.
And who exactly is this group? Well, the text refers to them as the toiling masses, but we really need to understand how the author defines this term. We aren't just talking about historical peasants from hundreds of years ago. According to the text, the toiling masses are those who spend literally their entire lives struggling for the basics: food, clothing, housing, and just general security. They're the people who work diligently, hoping year after year that they'll finally get ahead, but who constantly find themselves lacking any real safety net. Even if they put on a brave face, they're enduring this constant low-level anxiety, trouble, and just a totally relatable fear of what tomorrow might bring. This is absolutely crucial to understand because Xuefeng's entire ideological roadmap is designed specifically with the goal of rescuing this group from that perpetual struggle.
Okay, let's dive into this. To properly unpack this proposed utopia, we're going to follow the text's own clear structure. First, nature, wealth, and sharing. Second, failures of past movements. Third, fragility of modern systems. And finally, we'll hit Xuefeng-style communism. Starting off with Section 1, nature, wealth, and sharing. And really, the core problem of human selfishness.
So, before the author can propose any kind of utopian society, the text points out a massive fundamental roadblock: human instinct. Xuefeng argues that true communism is essentially all about absolute sharing. But, well, there's a glaring issue. The text states that people are just inherently selfish and intuitively reject the idea of sharing. And Xuefeng uses this incredibly relatable analogy, saying, if a person is so poor that they only have a broken bicycle, then they will be unwilling to allow anyone else to ride it. It's such a striking way to illustrate how scarcity just breeds possessiveness. But the text actually goes further, noting that it's not just an issue for the poor. When people acquire wealth, power, and status, vanity totally takes over. They actively want to live more luxuriously than their neighbors just to incite envy, which, makes them equally, if not more reluctant to share anything.
Moving right along to Section 2, Failures of Past Movements, or essentially, why historical utopias collapsed.
So, if sharing is the ultimate ideal, but human nature instinctively resists it, how have people tried to force it in the past? And this brilliantly illustrates the huge contrast the author's trying to make here. Xuefeng totally acknowledges why everyday people instinctively hate and resist the actual word communism. According to the source, ever since Karl Marx founded his theory, historical communist movements have almost always been promoted through violence and coercion. They actively damage the interests of property owners. The author states that these historical movements ran completely counter to what true communism should be. In contrast to all that, the text proposes a true model that it describes as gentle, soft, civilized, and strictly non-coercive. It explicitly argues that true sharing shouldn't ever involve violently depriving someone else of their property.
But listen, it's not just the violent revolutions that the author is critiquing here. It's also the peaceful utopian experiments. The text specifically calls out historical utopian communities, zooming in on the New Harmonious Village founded over in the United States by Robert Owen. So why did these peaceful, really well-intentioned communes fail? Well, the author argues that it all boiled down to a lack of clear blueprints. The utopian leaders were relying purely on passion. The text uses a fantastic visual metaphor here, saying the leaders were just crossing the river by feeling for the stones. Because they lacked a concrete systemic plan from the start, the moment they hit the natural wind, waves, and whirlpools of actually running a society, the whole experiment just drowned.
Which brings us to Section 3, the fragility of modern systems and the illusion of morals and democracy.
Okay, so if violent revolutions fail and passionate utopias fail, what about our current systems? Well, the text comes out swinging, arguing that moral education, regardless of whether it's religious or political, is fundamentally fragile. According to the author, morals are easily destroyed the second they come face to face with cold, hard reality and money. To back this up, the text points to modern China, asserting that even though officials were raised on Mao Zedong's strict moral ideology, the temptation of financial interest still led to staggering multi-billion yuan corruption. And then the author pivots right over to the West, using the 2020 U.S. presidential election as an example. The text argues that Western Christian morality completely failed to prevent mainstream media and international leaders from prematurely declaring a winner before all the facts and votes were totally settled. Ultimately, the text just dismisses all forms of spiritual preaching and moral education as mere anesthetics, or as they playfully call it, spiritual chicken soup, that completely fail to actually protect the toiling masses.
And it goes even deeper. The author argues that our political systems themselves are basically illusions of progress. We get another really vivid, culturally specific analogy from the source material here. The text argues that changing leaders, swapping political parties, or even replacing entire historical dynasties is merely changing the herbal soup but not the medicine. Think about that. The individuals in charge might change, but the underlying system, the actual medicine, remains exactly the same. In fact, the text asserts that the very systems we design to keep power in check actually become the exact soil that breeds corruption.
Let's move to and see how this builds. If you follow this logic, we are left with a pretty bleak view of history. Look at the historical timeline the author paints for the common people. It remains entirely flat. Because we only ever change the soup and not the actual medicine, thousands of years ago, the masses suffered. Today, even with modern democracies and the so-called separation of powers, the text argues they are still suffering and struggling with anxiety. And the author warns that for thousands of years to come, unless the fundamental mode of production and life is radically altered, the masses are going to do nothing but eternally dream of a better life that never comes.
All right, finally, Section 4, Xuefeng-style communism and the creation of the new oasis for life.
So, this incredibly dire historical diagnosis naturally leads us to the author's highly specific blueprint for a cure. The text introduces a model created by the author and their organization, Lifechanyuan, which they call the New Oasis for Life. And guys, the claims made for this Xuefeng-style model are absolutely massive. The author asserts that if we implement this specific lifestyle and production mode on a global scale, it would resolve territorial disputes between nations, totally halt the excessive consumption of the Earth's natural resources, literally eliminate war, refugees and hunger, and finally solve that seemingly impossible problem of government corruption. I mean, it's the whole shebang.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the highly specific metrics the author actually applies to these utopian claims. Look at the proposed impact on the crime rate. According to the text, transitioning to this exact societal blueprint wouldn't just, reduce crime a little bit. It claims it would eliminate a whopping 3/4 of all criminal activities worldwide.
And the statistical claims don't stop there. The author states that by completely removing the crushing, day-to-day anxieties of our traditional mode of living, this new system would literally cut global suicide rates by more than half.
But wait, here is without a doubt the boldest numerical claim presented in the source material. The author flat out promises that under Xuefeng-style communism, an astonishing 98% of people would be guaranteed happy, joyful, free, and totally blessed lives. It's presented as this absolute mind-blowing paradigm shift for the vast majority of humanity.
So the crucial point is, why do we even need this massive systemic overhaul in the first place? Why can't individuals just put their heads down, work hard, and succeed in the system we already have? Well, the text addresses this directly, completely attacking what it calls the illusion of individual success. The author acknowledges, sure, some commoners manage to buy million-yuan houses, get fancy cars, or secure those highly coveted iron rice bowl civil service jobs. And because of that, they feel like they've finally escaped the struggling masses. But Xuefeng warns, actually scratch that. Xuefeng basically guarantees that this is just self-anesthesia. The text argues that without control over the broader system, your expensive car is just scrap iron if things go south. A million-yuan house is just a cage if you lose your income. And civil service jobs offer nothing but temporary comfort before the bitter realities of life eventually catch up with you. True security, the text argues, literally cannot be achieved on an individual level.
Which brings us right to the author's ultimate uncompromising conclusion, captured perfectly in this final quote from the text. Communism is the only way to happiness for the toiling masses and the only way out for mankind. Through this explainer, we've traced Xuefeng's argument all the way from the inherent selfishness of human nature, right through the failures of history and modern democracy, down to this radical, highly specific blueprint for a new oasis for life. It is a sweeping, intensely provocative vision that challenges the very foundations of how we organize human society. So, what do you make of these bold claims? Does the text accurately hit the nail on the head regarding the root cause of human suffering? Or is this grand vision just another utopian blueprint destined to drown in the whirlpools of reality? It's a genuinely fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you. Catch you next time.